Good morning, my fellow Canadians. I haven't done a post in a while. I spent almost a month in Facebook jail because the fake checkers apparently saying die Russian scum is considered hate speech when you see the barbarity and brutality of the Russian military in Ukraine. So they didn't like that. Too bad. I've been watching what's going on there. I've been listening to commentary, pro and contra. But one in particular really frosted me, really had me angry. And it was some U.S. pseudo-intellectual with an exaggerated sense of his intellect and his ability to assess fact. And his posting was, Ukraine has lost the war. Not is losing. Ukraine has lost the war. This was his post. And I looked at that. I watched it. To digress for a second, I watch contrary programming, contrary commentary, things that conflict with my knowledge and things that conflict with my beliefs, because I want to know how those who are opposed to me have those have a contrary position. I want to know how they think. I want to know what information they're using and what reasoning they're using to justify their position. And I would urge everybody out there, if you're a mature and intelligent person, listen to those who oppose you. Listen to those who disagree with you. Listen. Don't have to accept it, but listen to it. There's two things. Sometimes, well, they say a broken clock is right twice a day. Sometimes, I've seen commentaries like the David Pakman Show, Jimmy Dore, the Young Turks. Once in a while, they say something that is actually on the mark. Once in a rare while, but they actually do. So give it a listen. A friend and I were talking not that long ago about the totally misplaced belief that intelligence or expertise and education in one area automatically translates into expertise in all areas. So I'm listening to this guy. I don't know who he was. He was not some young guy. He was an older gentleman. And that Ukraine has lost the war. Now, anybody who's been following what's going on there knows that there's a tremendous amount of misinformation, flawed analysis. People are using the war to advance their personal agendas. There's leftist ideology. You see shallow reasoning coming out of a lot of these posts and an ignorance of essential facts and data that I think should be addressed. Ukraine has lost the war. I'd like to point out to anybody who follows this, who sees Ukraine as lost or is losing, what I haven't heard anybody address is one simple thing. Currently, Russia holds approximately 20% of the Ukraine. But that's not all new territorial gains. The war in the Donbass has been going on since 2014, and it was Russian-controlled territory. I don't know the percentage of territory, of new territorial gains made since the war started, since the 2022, February 24th invasion. But I would urge anybody who can do basic math, look at how much new territory they've gained versus how much it cost the Russian military. That will paint perhaps a more accurate picture of how successful the Russian military is in Ukraine. You get it? What it has cost them for the gains they have made is massively disproportionate and very damaging to Russia. Now, another fact that the pundits seem to ignore. Russia has a 10-to-1 superiority in artillery. Yeah, but unless you can feed that artillery, then all you've got are a bunch of giant boat anchors. And you notice the Ukraine, especially since they've gotten the high precision accuracy ordnance, they've been hitting command and control centers. They've been hitting ammo dumps. Now, you hit ammo dumps in the newly occupied territories. It forces Russia to extend its supply line because they have to bring the replacement ordnance from Russia. Longer your supply line, the more open it is to attack. This is basic military strategy. So to listen to that disparity, the numbers that 10 to 1 is not an accurate number. These things are running out of ordnance. Now the other thing, people spouting the Russian line that the sanctions are ineffective. That's Russia's claim. Again, people in the know point out that the Russian ruble is being propped up by Putin's personal finances as well as the reserves that they had built up. The sanctions are hurting Russia, not the average people so much if you watch some of the interviews. Where it's hurting them is militarily, and it's hurting them very, very, very badly. And I would point out one of the things that, again, seem to be ignored by a lot of the pundits. One or two people have actually mentioned this. Russia is massively reliant on outsourcing foreign sources for their sophisticated electronics. So modern tanks, they can't replace. I'm going to use the term AFV, Armored Fighting Vehicle, just standard military term. Their AFVs are almost irreplaceable. They are bringing out of storage Cold War era, what I would call dumb armor. Okay? Basically optically sighted. Things like thermal imaging, laser range finding, these are all reliant upon sophisticated electronics that they cannot domestically produce. So every modern tank they lose, they have to replace it with a piece of dumb Cold War era technology. Minus the sophisticated electronics, the detection systems, they cannot replace any of the AFVs, and that's the captured radar systems, precision guided munitions, cruise missiles. Every one they use cannot be reproduced in Russia. Every precision guided munition they fire is one less. So they're relying more and more on dumb munitions, basically plaster the whole area. Same applies to their aircraft. Modern avionics require sophisticated electronics, and they can't replace their losses. That's hardly ever mentioned. Now, the Ukraine is being extremely wise tactically for two reasons. One, they know that they only have a finite supply of precision munitions. So they're very wise in their use tactically. Two, unlike the Russians, they are very conscious of collateral damage. It's their country. It's their people who are at risk. Russia doesn't care. Their claim about we're only targeting military infrastructure has been disproven so widely. What, 90% of Mariupol was military? Because that's about how much of it they destroyed. So the Russian claims that we're only attacking military targets, and they still spout it out, gaslighting at its most obvious. So the Ukraine is using these things wisely. They are hitting command and control centers. They're hitting ammunition dumps. They are hitting Russian military infrastructure for the reasons that I mentioned. They're very, very sparing in the use of these things, and they are using them where tactically they do the most good. They're using dumb munitions like artillery against troop concentrations and saturation fire against troop and armored concentrations. But for the big targets, like I said, command and control, CNC, command and control centers, ammo dumps. So they're being tactically, they are outfighting the Russians to an incredible degree. And they are making gains, territorial gains, bit by bit. Now, the other thing I'd like to mention, and I've only seen it mentioned once, and I knew this was coming because of the information I was given by my buddy in the Ukrainian military. You hear very little about the guerrilla groups and the partisan groups in the newly occupied territories. You see, Ukraine knew that if a war broke out, which they were totally afraid of, they hoped it wouldn't, but they were prepared for the fact that it could. They left behind trained partisans, trained, civilian looking, but militarily trained in IEDs, in sabotage, in harassment. They left this behind, knowing these units. So we're seeing ammo dumps going up. We're seeing even in Russia, Russian infrastructure being destroyed, militarily important chemical plants, things like this. Bear in mind the similarities between the two. It is easier for a Ukrainian to pass as a Russian because they grew up speaking Russian, and many of them have it down to science. There's a lot of Ukrainians in Russia, Ukrainian patriots in Russia, subverting the Russian war effort. This is very rarely mentioned. Now, there is a standard progression to guerrilla or partisan warfare, and I'm afraid this is going to happen. Anybody who's studied military history knows the progression. An occupying military force starts coming under harassment, assassinations, sabotage. Barbaric regimes tend to react barbarically, like the Nazis did in the occupied countries, in Norway, in Holland, in France. When they had a part in Russia, my God, their barbarity was incredible, what the Nazis did. So they start doing brutal and practicing brutal and barbaric responses to this harassment. Things like arbitrarily shooting every German soldier we lost, we will kill 10 hostages. What happens as a consequence, you take people who were fence sitters, who were neutral, fatalistic, said, well, okay, so it happened, we'll just live with it. Well, it takes those people and you galvanize them and you turn them into enemies when they lose a son or a daughter or a wife or a husband, or a child or whatever. Now you're creating, instead of terrorizing the population, you're creating more partisans. You're creating more guerrillas, more opposition. This has happened time and time again. We've seen this. You're watching Russian barbarity on full display. The hammering of the cities, the hammering of civilian infrastructure, and always the same excuse. Oh, they were harboring, it was a Ukrainian ammunition dump. Funny that the ammunition dump didn't explode when it got blasted, but it was a Ukrainian ammunition dump. It was ordnance storage. The mall was empty. Oh, I love that one when they hit the mall. What about the train station in Kramatorsk? Oh, that wasn't us. That was a Ukrainian missile. And there are people stupid enough to believe the Russian propaganda, which to me is just absolutely freaking astounding. The Russians have failed to learn from history that attempting to terrorize a people through mass destruction does not, has not, never will work. The Germans learned it during the Blitz. They bombed the hell out of Britain. Did it break the will of the British people to resist? Not in the least. The Allies found it the same thing. Carpet bombing German cities, terror bombing of German cities, terror bombing of Japan. Did it break the will of the people? Nope. And at the end of the day, militarily, you can have the best Air Force in the world, the most powerful Navy in the world. You cannot take and hold territory without boots on the ground. Very few of these so-called pundits seem to grasp the fact that Ukraine is fighting for its survival, because this is a genocidal war on the part of Putin. Make no mistake. This is a continuation, historically, of Russia's attempt to subjugate Ukraine or eradicate it as a separate nation. This is nothing new. Historically, it's all there. A gentleman, Vlad Dobriansky, did a very good breakdown of how many edicts and laws have been passed since Alexander the Great in an attempt to eradicate Ukrainian culture and keep Ukraine as basically a vassal state, as a nation in name only, but with no cultural or separate identity from Russia. So you've got a people fighting for the survival of their nation versus an unmotivated, ill-equipped, poor morale army attacking them. This is a very, very, very powerful factor. 80% approximately of Ukraine is still unoccupied, and they are training. And thanks to the West and other people who love freedom, they are getting the equipment they need to resist effectively. And Russia will find itself bogged down in a decades-long war if they keep trying to extend their military reach. The other thing I found, and to my American friends, I would say this. Many Americans are saying, why are we spending money in Ukraine? Why are we sending aid to Ukraine? Look at how much it costs. You're right. You're absolutely right. It's a tremendous drain on the American military and on the American taxpayer. But I would remind you that America was one of the countries that guaranteed Ukrainian territorial sovereignty if they would agree to give up their nuclear capability. So all the nukes that the Ukraine possessed went over to Russia to be dispersed or destroyed, with the guarantee, and including both from Russia, well, Russian guarantee, you see what that's worth, but also the US guaranteed Ukrainian territorial sovereignty. So yes, is it a drain on you? Yes, and my heart goes out to you. But this is a commitment that your president made to Ukraine. So that's my little dissertation on Ukraine is losing the war. Comments are more than welcome. Slava Ukraini. Heroyam Slava.